As the scramble for Africa was underway, one of the most contested targets in Africa was Morocco. Its strategic location at the entrance of the Mediterranean made it especially desirable for multiple nations. France and Spain in particular had territorial ambitions over the Sultanate, with Spain already controlling coastal cities of Ceuta, Melilla, and Sidi Ifni, while France was eagerly expanding its influence in the region. However, these two nations weren't the only ones interested. Germany in 1905, hoping to check French expansion, challenged France's influence in Morocco by declaring their support for Moroccan sovereignty. The resulting international incident led to the Algeciras Conference, which had a few concessions to European businessmen and settlers in Morocco and temporarily halted French activity in the country. But it also led to further tensions between Germany and France, as well as Germany and the British. In 1907, French forces were already taking more territory in Morocco, and by 1911 an uprising in Morocco was used as an excuse by the French to occupy even more, all in the guise of protecting European citizens living in Morocco. Spain also occupied territory out of fear of the entire nation falling under France's control. Germany once again objected, sending a German gunboat off the coast of Agadir, causing yet another international incident that would be known as the Agadir Crisis. At first, Germany was once again demanding Morocco's sovereignty to be respected, but an economic crisis caused by the tensions forced them to change their tune. A treaty was signed on November 4th, 1911 between Germany and France, where Germany agreed to allow France to expand into Morocco, and in exchange they would receive territorial concessions to the German colony of Cameroon in Central Africa. With Germany out of the way, France pressured Morocco into signing the Treaty of Fez on March 30th, 1912. This effectively turned Morocco into a French protectorate. The Sultanate of Morocco on paper existed, but in reality the French could occupy as much of Morocco as it wanted to in the so-called protection of the Sultan. In November, another treaty was signed with Spain to grant them their own protectorate zones over Morocco as well. However, despite these agreements, there were multiple areas of trouble. Firstly, plenty of anti-European Moroccans resisted their control, and multiple rebellions would prevent full pacification of Morocco until all the way in 1934. But the other source of contention was specifically around the city of Tangier. Tangier was a large city in a very strategic location, and both France and Spain desired control over it. In addition, the British were also interested because they were concerned about keeping the Straits of Gibraltar from being dominated by a single power, aka they didn't want Tangier to compete with Gibraltar. To satisfy all parties, a 1912 agreement between France and Spain agreed that Tangier would be administrated uniquely outside of both zones, with the Moroccans appointing a special governor. However, all parties involved noted that this agreement was temporary and a more official status would be decided upon later. Naturally, World War I would delay things, but eventually on December 18, 1923, France, Spain, and the United Kingdom established the Paris Convention. Tangier was to be a neutral zone under a joint administration between those three countries as well as any other country who would sign onto the convention. Well, except for Germany, Austria, Hungary, and the Soviet Union. Belgium signed onto the agreement in December of 1924, and soon the Tangier International Zone was officially in place on June 1st, 1925. So while it wasn't administered by everyone under the international systems of the time, it potentially could be administered by everyone except for apparently 4 countries. Morocco would appoint an administrator while a legislative assembly existed made up of the countries a part of the agreement. Sweden, Netherlands, and Portugal soon signed the agreement. The United States was given a seat on the zone's legislative assembly, but that position was never filled and they never ratified the convention. Italy was given 2 seats in the assembly, but they initially refused to sign the convention, feeling that it was an insult not to consult them from the very beginning. To appease fascist Italy, Italy was given 3 seats to be equals to the British, and a new agreement reflected all this in 1928. What made the zone special was not just its military and sovereign neutrality, but also its economic neutrality. No tariffs existed on goods brought into or sent out of the region, and it was a tax haven by design. Tangier's international status also led it to become a center for early 20th century cultural internationalism and bohemianism. Even things like homosexuality and cannabis were tolerated in Tangier due to the legal ambiguity of the zone, which naturally helped its tourism industry. This unique international status lasted until World War II. On June 14, 1940, Paris fell to the Germans. Spanish dictator Francisco Franco used this as an excuse to occupy the international zone on the same day, with the public reason being it was to protect the zone from falling into German hands. However, in November of that same year, the assembly was abolished and the zone was officially annexed into Spanish Morocco. At the end of World War II, the Allies decided to make changes to the zone, including adding both the United States and the Soviet Union, reversing Italy's extra representatives, kicking Spain out entirely at the insistence of the Soviet Union, and so on. Spain gave up their occupation and restored the international zone on October 11, 1945. Eventually, the Soviet Union became disinterested in Tangier and withdrew, and so a new agreement in 1952 let Spain back in and added some legal reforms. But that didn't really end up mattering for too long, as Morocco achieved full independence from Spain and France in 1956, and by the end of the year they agreed to return the international zone to Morocco. In a manner similar to the future handover of Hong Kong in 1997, Tangier actually kept a lot of its unique privileges that the zone originally had, at least until 1960. Tangier's nearly 5 decades of uniqueness had come to an end. While Tangier was not the only so-called international zone in human history, what set it apart is that unlike a United Nations occupied zone or a temporary post-war neutral zone, this was one established as a compromise between competitive imperialist powers. It was a legalistic version of, well, if I can't have it, no one can, in action. It was an example of how complicated the multipolar world used to be, and I find it kind of interesting. I'm Emperor Tiger Star, and I'll see you guys next time.